Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Tech Bites. I am Rick Vanover, the Rickatron, and I am on the road here in Nevada, USA. And we want to know where you are tuning in from. We're live on several social platforms. We've got myself, and I'm joined by Michael. We'll introduce Michael here in just a moment. But we also have Jeffrey and Felicia working on our production team. We want to know where you're from. We got this really cool map application. I'm on LinkedIn right here on my phone. Live is live. I'm doing this right here as we're talking. And my guest today is Michael Anderson from Opti9 Technologies. Good day, afternoon, Michael. How are you?
Thanks so much, Rick. I'm great. It's a pleasure to be here on the show with you today.
Indeed. And, Opti9, really impactful service provider partner here at Veeam. And you guys are doing some really cool stuff. We'll get to that here in a second. But, Michael, tell me a little bit, just an overview about Opti9 and then your specific role on the team.
Sure. Opti9 is one of Canada's premier Veeam service providers, and we work with our clients on many different solutions. It could be managing Veeam backups for them, working with disaster recovery scenarios, and providing Cloud Connect and other storage needs for our clients, as well as licensing and pretty much anything they could possibly need for their backups.
It's funny because when we were preparing for the show, we talked about, well, what about the network? Can we talk about the network? Some of the other services and stuff come into play. And one of the things I want to just bring out to the audience, and, those of you who have been following what we've been doing through the year at VeeamON with like the DRMM, the data resilience maturity and more, one of the things that I have been saying for years, but now I kind of have evidence with the DRMM and other things, it's like, it's okay to ask for help, right? A lot of times organizations can't do everything on their own, especially these things like disaster recovery and the preparedness as such. Michael, just kind of the first question before we get into some of the details. Do you find that organizations simply just can't do it all on their own? I mean, I know that you guys have built a successful practice on it, but I got to think you're solving a real operational problem for folks.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think it would be extraordinary to expect every IT person at every company to be familiar with, every facet of that. You're not going to be a Veeam subject matter expert and Active Directory expert and so on. So, seeking help from the experts and getting advice is absolutely, there's nothing wrong with it, right? You can always ask for help.
Indeed. And I feel that a lot of folks, when they talk about the specific mechanics of disaster recovery, it's one of those things that they almost don't want to talk about it because they haven't practiced, they haven't prepared. There's a lot of gaps both in what they've implemented, but I've also seen a lot of times organizations have a different type of gap. We'll call it a misunderstanding on their stakeholder expectations. Like, what does the business expect? So it's like there's this fundamental math or formula. It's like, what can we do and what have we implemented and what does the business expect? I got to think that you've had incredible discoveries on both ends of that. Any examples of like stakeholder expectations that aren't aligned that in the course of what you've done for some of your clients that have been kind of like really interesting surprises or, I'm sure you've had them, but any examples to share?
Had many surprises during various DR tests, but yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest disconnects I find is often between senior business leadership and the IT team, and over basic RTOs and RPOs. How fast are you going to be able to recover your virtual machines? And perhaps leadership expects that it'll happen in 5 minutes, but the customer is not doing any kind of CDP or replication. And so the answer is it's not. Like, obviously with Sure Backup, you could potentially recover in 5 minutes, but it really depends on the scenario. And often I work with various IT teams and their CEOs, will join and we review a DR plan and they're shocked. They're like, oh, I didn't know that it would take this long or that this networking component would be a challenge. So.
Yeah, I got to think that that has been a constant thing. And one of the things that I really admire that the Opti9 team have done is this DR plan template. And, I tested the QR code here momentarily, but walk us through, Michael, what happens when an organization takes this template and kind of the discovery process, and what kind of information would folks go through to kind of get some better outcomes?
Sure. Well, I mean, the template it tries to go through kind of all the basic facets of what you would do in a disaster. So, things like network design, what virtual machines or what machines in general need to be recovered in what order, um, VPN tunnels and so on, but also like important things that I think get overlooked, like the stakeholders. Who do you contact in the event of a DR? Who does the business contact? Are they just going to open a ticket, and so on? And if it's the director of IT as an example, what if they're away? And what if they're overseas in a way? What if they're just not available? Who's the next in line? So these are all things that typically actually get overlooked. And then not only who to contact, but how do you contact them? So it seems very basic, but ultimately a lot of these things can get overlooked. And so the template tries to walk you through all the technical components, but also almost like the soft components, right? The people part. How do you contact your service provider? Who in IT do you contact? And then as well, there's a component for business leadership. There's executive summaries, and it helps them to better explain to their own staff as well as perhaps what's going on.
So a lot to unpack there. And before I go into that, I want to raise one comment from Senzo, who's tuning in from South Africa. I don't know what time it is there, but it's late. So I appreciate you joining, Senzo. Welcome. Senzo has a comment. He says, DR always seems to take too long when someone is under pressure. And I have a story I want to share on that. I remember, and this is distinctly one of the things that made me fall in love with data protection, backup, and more. I distinctly remember one time we had an outage. It was earlier in my career when I was a sysadmin, and I had like the shaky hand on the mouse trying to do something that I've never done before. And I think that speaks to the comfort of in these situations. I would say you almost have to be comfortable being uncomfortable, and you have to train for the abnormal scenarios. This is work. This is an expertise. This is a discipline that organizations have to just put that time investment here. And when everyone's watching, yeah, it takes a long time and you're under pressure. Whereas if an organization and if individuals are prepared, they're comfortable with being uncomfortable, they have a plan, those things go so much better. So Senzo, you have it right. I'm going to give you another like on LinkedIn for that one. Just got word from the producers that the map is ready. So let's take a look here. Let's start with North and Central America. We've got a lot of Canada tuning in. We've got Wisconsin. We've added New Jersey, a couple other states. Let us know. We'll light up the map. Let's take a look at Africa and the Middle East. And I mentioned Senzo's tuning in from South Africa. And we also have an individual tuning in from Pune. Vikram, welcome. Welcome. Thanks, everyone. Again, let us know. We'll see if we can come back to the map again. What U.S. state, what country, the little click map application. We'll put the producers on their test to see what country they can light up. That's kind of fun. So appreciate that. But on that line there, you talk about stakeholders and communication, Michael. I think sometimes just going through the drill of asking the question, who's in charge? How do we communicate it? A lot of times organizations haven't really thought about that. I can share you one kind of quick example from Veeam's tech support. I always talk to them about what goes good and what doesn't go good in some of the scenarios with our products, because I talk about our products every day. But when I hear them talk about our products, it's a very different kind of perspective. And I was one time talking to the ransomware recovery team, what we call the SWAT team, and they were telling me about a scenario where they had the backup data ready to recover. It was a ransomware incident, and they were like, okay, we'll go ahead and recover this data. But the customer didn't even know who was in charge. They didn't even know how to declare a disaster or declare an emergency. And that's not a technical thing. That's a people and process thing. I mean, I got to think you've come into some discoveries like that before.
Oh, absolutely. And the funny thing is we get disaster recoveries that come into Opti9, and you immediately go check the backups and you're raring to go and you're like, okay, we can recover your data. It's surprising how often that immediately there's a checkered flag and it's like stop. We're not ready to actually recover anything yet. And that's one of the funny things with the RTOs and the RPOs and everything else is if the company is not planning ahead for things like ransomware or what kind of disaster, they may not even be able to initiate the recovery in the time that they expect.
Well, I think that the expectation, the time, I think that's super important. And when I look at organizations that are trying to just improve, one of the big pieces of advice, and I'm actually really curious, the one piece of advice I've given clients is to start small. And what I mean by start small is like if you really look in what's going on and what the expectations are, what's been implemented, there's going to be gaps. And everything from, the plan that we just showed, and we'll come back to that, is a good way to do a great discovery. But simply just talking to your stakeholders, this is what we've implemented, this is what we've expected. There's going to be an incredible amount of work. I've had advice to start small, and let me give you an example of that. My advice of starting small is to take one business function, maybe a collection of applications that are not the biggest, nastiest collection of things in the organization, but have an internal alignment that the process around DR and this broader resiliency works, and have a good, clean success. Test it, validate it, and then move on to, like, more larger scale implementations, because chances are you're going to learn a lot about your production infrastructure in this journey as well, not just the mechanics of DR. What do you think of my advice of starting small, or maybe pivot it to when you engage with a client? How do you ramp up? Do you start small and then work to the bigger ones? I've kind of had that start small advice on the do it yourself mode, but I'm just curious to your kind of perspective there.
Yeah, so typically for us, when we're involved in a DR test for a client, it's past the start small stage, Rick, but it is a good idea. And frankly, those bigger, nastier machines that might pose your problems, why start there, right? You're going to get bogged down in the weeds. You just want to nail the recovery process. I've remarked many times internally here, people can be experts in backup and have never done a recovery. It's really shocking. And so starting small is perfect. Yeah, pick the lower risk virtual machines and then have a successful recovery. Get that wind under your wings, and then definitely then you can move on and grow and start learning the challenges.
I think that's good. That really kind of lands well, and I think that organizations need to match, the technology implementation with, their expectations. And it is some work, but it's also, like I said, okay to ask for help. Another comment just came in from Senzo. Senzo says, to add on the communication point, one organization I used to work for, we ended up doing in-house training for all staff members able to do DR. Now that is an interesting twist, because I'm going to steal another playbook out of the ransomware world, but a lot of times when, like, a ransomware incident happens, it's mysteriously when the subject matter expert is hiking in a mountain with no communication. And so I'm going to pivot that to a question for you, Michael. When you think about organizations, when they have to actually activate these plans, people can be single points of failures. What's your advice and the best practice of how you and your team at Opti9, how do you go about cross training and making sure multiple people are ready to kind of activate these plans and technologies?
Well, I mean, it's important to have the plan on file with all your IT staff, as well as perhaps your executive level. They should all be aware of where it is, how to access it, and who's named in it. So be familiar with your DR plan before you need it. And then the other thing is, if you do have a service provider where you might be recovering to an offsite, DR site, file your plan with them. If they didn't help you craft it, then at least pass it on to them and say, in the event of a DR, here's our DR plan, and then be ready for that. And then drill, that's the other thing, and I agree, like drilling the recoveries. It's something I was just pitching to a client today, is like consider actually have trainings, like set up a lab if you want, and then practice, 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 and when the moment comes you'll be ready. It's like anything else. You have muscle memory and you want to activate it. In this case it's this muscle, but you got to practice these things, Rick.
Indeed. And I think it's really important to highlight that Michael and his team at Opti9, they have four main, I'm looking at their website right now at opti9tech.com, and they have four main Veeam powered offerings: backup as a service, disaster recovery as a service, Microsoft 365 cloud backup. And then I've got a question for you, Michael. This last one, cybersecurity. Kind of, I love always having the base data kind of protection DR tackled. But tell me a little bit about this other cyber angle that was part of the stack that you and your colleagues offer.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we offer, through a partnership with Field Effect, we offer MDR services, so helping to detect and mitigate ransomware and these other risks before they even happen. Prevention, as everyone knows, is going to be your best strategy where possible, and you have to be prepared ahead of time. Just expecting people not to click things is just not necessarily going to be a realistic plan, right? So we work with our customers to offer a whole solution, not just backups, but also potentially offering these security enhancements and mitigations as well.
I can't tell you how many times I've had organizations ask me, and I'm glad I asked you this on the call. They asked me, I really want to contract the number of vendors, and I want a hosted MDR, and I will keep you all first name basis there. We got one comment from Vivian on LinkedIn. She plus ones. She likes my comment of starting small, making sense. She goes on to say that most of the organizations want to play around and decide the needs versus the wants of data recovery in buckets. I like that one, Vivian, because when I've been through organizations that go through the need versus want, and Michael, I'm curious if you agree with this, they kind of get into this like cut of three. There's this like collection of stuff we absolutely need now in a DR kind of use case. There's this next block of stuff that we will need eventually, and then there's stuff we don't need. I mean, I'm simplifying it a bit, but I think a lot of organizations go through like a discovery of the wants versus needs. What would you say based on Vivian's comment?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I think it's often surprising to these organizations. They think that they need, say 20% of the machines. And the reality is their wants, actually might be higher. It can really surprise you how many more you need, Rick, is really what it boils down to. Like, you think you only need your domain controller and your Exchange server as an example, and then you're like, oh well, we can get the file server online later, but it turns out that maybe the DR plan's on the file server and you haven't backed it up somewhere else. So there's all sorts of ways that this stuff can come out of the woodwork, and you just had no idea that it was that important. This is also where doing full scale testing can be helpful, because when someone goes to test the application, they go, oh wait, this server that we thought was ancillary is really required as part of our solution.
Well, that and the dev system is also driving the production. I can't imagine that's not happened before. And so I'll bring this up again here. Opti9 has this DR plan template. And so some of the things that we spoke about, you can go to this QR code, or if you don't trust me, you can just use this link here, and you can get started with a template to kind of activate some of these discovery functions in your environment and kind of lead to some positive outcomes. And while we have that up, I want to highlight, congratulations, Veeam Service Provider of the Year for Canada, silver competency for the value-added reseller. That's actually super important to note, because Opti9 has more than just, okay, I'm not just a service provider, I also can be the reseller. And then you mentioned the hosted MDR. It's a full stack of services that I think is really important to note. And we've got some great we have a Vanguard on staff. I can't remember who it is. I'm drawing a blank and I'm going crazy. Who's the Vanguard? I can't remember. But anyways, but we have good feeds through the team over the years. So check this out. Highly competent team with Opti9. You're doing some very innovative stuff, and we've had Sagi on before and some others, so it's just really cool to see what you all are up to. And then holding the share here one more time, Jeffrey, I just want to jump to a couple other ways here. You've got some emails, got some websites, got some phone numbers, got some socials, and got some LinkedIn. And, these folks are definitely ready to engage. But I got one more question for you, Michael. So when I think about DR, getting the preparedness, tell me about what you have seen with your clients when it's over, coming back, or do I stay in a hosted platform? Tell me about how some of those scenarios go post-incident when they've prepared correctly.
This is actually something I get the most questions about, Rick. People are like, that's great. We can recover to your cloud and run in your cloud. Then what? And so it really does come down to what you choose to do after. Obviously, we've had a lot of clients who it was a hardware failure and they were frankly tired of maintaining their hardware and hardware competency. And so ultimately they chose to remain in our cloud after the disaster. And then we've also had many of clients who, once everything's cleaned up and they're ready to go back, they want to know that path. And it can be funny. There's so many different ways to go back from the DR site to your on-prem. It could be replication back. It's funny, I always tell customers, we're going to turn you into the service provider. And we essentially set them up as a Cloud Connect target, and then we replicate back to them. If it's less urgent or they can afford some downtime. I've even had failbacks where we back up the production machines in our cloud to a hard drive, and we pop it in the mail, and express obviously, but it arrives the next day, and they use Veeam backup and replication to then recover those machines. They afforded themselves a little bit of downtime, maybe on a weekend, and they essentially did it the slow way. But there's so many different options to do that. And then if you are using Veeam replication in general to host your hot site and be ready, depending on how long the DR was, there's always the built-in failback features, right? So so many options out there, Rick, but it's actually, again, it's one of the questions that get overlooked. Great, we've DR'd, now what? How is the recovery process back? And a lot of people really expect it to be, instant, and it's just nothing in life is ever instant, Rick. So it's about figuring out the data path.
Yeah, and there's incredible gravity to the data. It's big, and sometimes we can get away with a hard drive, and sometimes we can't. On some of these reseeding, and that blows my mind that you almost reverse the flow, that the tenant is hosting their Cloud Connect target. That my mind spun when you told me that, but it actually makes a lot of sense. And this is just the thing that I want to really drill to the attendees. Michael and his colleagues do this all the time. There's nothing they haven't seen, right? When you think about your use cases for, the categories I mentioned, they have the expertise. They have the individuals that are doing this all the time. And so it honestly becomes a pretty clear, in my opinion, choice that you go to these experts to do this type of thing. And then when you get into a scenario of a failback, that's something I never even thought of. And I think about using Veeam for everything, right? And the thought is, like, for example, I don't use Veeam templates in my lab, VM templates, I should say. I just restore Veeam, right? Especially now I'm using so many different hypervisors, right? I don't want to maintain 5 different templates. I have one backup and I just restore it to where I need to go. And those of you who are practitioners might be like, actually, that's pretty cool. And with instant, it's actually pretty fast, right? So you kind of see where I'm going with it. One comment came in from Jay, tuning in from India, even later than the other than Senzo. He says, recommendation to have the DR plans basically just safe and easy for human use. And actually, that's a fair assumption and a pretty good standard, just safe and easy to use, because what you don't want to see is like somebody go down a path, activate something, and cause data issues across the business. And a couple more people tuning in, so that's good stuff. Michael, one other question I have for you. What about when you think about organizations when they go through their DR exercise to prepare and things like that, do you ever find that they end up doing house cleaning, right? My thought is, if you take a broad look across your business about what needs DR, kind of to that last third that I mentioned that we don't really need that, do people end up reducing their scope the more they talk to you because they were just streamlining and efficient, making their IT more efficient? Do you see any of that, or is that just a guess out of my a bad dream?
I do see some of that. I mean, I think that's every sysadmin's dream, right? Reduce the footprint at the end of the day. But occasionally we'll see that. The other thing, we'll see, Rick, that's kind of surprising is the backups are intact and everything is great from a Veeam perspective. But a lot of people find surprises in their virtual machines that they weren't aware of. So maybe the operating system was corrupt, or maybe they were using an iSCSI disk and they didn't understand that Veeam, as a VM won't see it. Things like that. There can be little upsets like that, but particularly, yeah, people don't necessarily understand or don't see the issues in their environment until they DR, and that can be, one of the funny challenges that comes up all the time, and this could drive someone to change the software they're using, is a lot of software these days still uses old school like licensing methods. It's tied to a MAC address on a system, and if you need to recover that, the MAC address is very likely to change, and you can spoof it, and there's other options. But these are the sort of things that happen, and they can absolutely drive change in organizations after the fact.
That's incredible. And I think, yeah, those surprises, those gotchas, those are the things you're going to stub your toe on. MAC addresses, network, maybe people put static routes into systems that don't work in the new location. Yeah, you've seen it all. And again, these are the things that make the difference. So, here's again some contact info for Opti9. Trust me, this is a really good service provider, folks. They've got a full stack of offerings. You can get them at opti9tech.com, as well as LinkedIn, socials, and just one more time, hold that, Jeffrey, just one more time, the DR plan template. Y'all can check that out. These folks know what they're doing. All right. So, hey, Michael, I want to thank you for joining me here on Tech Bites today. This has been a really fascinating conversation.
Yeah, Rick, it's something I actually love talking about, is testing your backups and being prepared. It's one of my favorite topics, and it's not always a sexy topic, but it's something that's important for everyone.
Absolutely. And, you're getting the attention. You got Ghani tuning in from Malaysia. It's after midnight there. So welcome. It's just like, it's crazy what we get. So I agree. I love this stuff and I talk about it every day. I actually talked to an analyst here today or yesterday about that at this analyst event that I'm at. Good stuff. All right. On behalf of our producers, I want to give a big thanks to Jeffrey in the Barncade, and also a big thank you to Felicia in the DFW, who are bringing this content to you. We also have several members of the Infotech and Veeam, several members of the Opti9 team and the Veeam team who have helped bring this content to you. But we are going to wrap it. And one promotion to hit is that, have you seen Veeam's YouTube lately? We have so many cool videos there. We have the library of industry insights, have the library of tech bites, the library of community recap, product demos, customer stories. That's where it's at. Check it out. And last comment actually comes from Senzo, our first comment. He says, best practice, test it all every 3 months. I'd say test it more often, but definitely reassess it every quarter. Good stuff. All right, Michael, hey, thank you so much for joining me again.
Thanks so much, Rick. It was a pleasure to be on the show.
All right, everyone, that concludes our broadcast for today. Thanks for watching, and we will see you on the next Veeam Tech Bites.